I also want to thank the candidates and welcome them, and welcome our moderator, Erika Aguilar from KQED, who's going to take it from here. Thanks.
Hi. Hola, guys. Thank you for coming. Thank you for spending an afternoon on the weekend on St. Patrick's Day. To learn more about housing in your city, such an important topic. I cover housing for KQED. Most recently, I've been tasked with producing a new daily podcast at KQED called The Bay, which takes me a lot away from my prior job as a housing reporter. However, I now push a lot of these housing issues onto the Bay and the podcast there because it is such an important topic for the Bay Area and for California as well. So thank you so much for being here and spending time. Thank you also for participating as a voter, wanting to be informed and engaged and wanting to make the city better. This is how communities are started, and this is how we live. So thank you so much for being a voter and being here to be ready to be informed and ask questions. I want to also say that this video, this event is being video recorded, so just to make sure if you are interested in asking a question, you are likely going to be video recorded and your voice will also be recorded. If you're interested in asking a question, again, the cards are over here on the table. Do us a favor and pass them down to the end so the volunteers can pick them up and we can continue to have a conversation up here with our candidates. Let's see, what other housekeeping things I want to tell you? Yes?
And can I remind you to also put your name on the back of the card? You'll be the one asking the question.
That would be great. Okay, so the reminder is to put your name on the back of the card. So the way that will work is I will walk up to you, we'll bring them in, we're gonna try to get as many questions as we can. I'll read your name, ask you to stand up, walk over to you, have yourself introduce yourself to the community. This is, again, a safe space where we want to have open dialogue and safe conversation. And then we'll have you read your question, and the candidates will have a chance to answer them. This is an opportunity for our candidates who are running for San Francisco mayor to tell us more about where they stand on housing and what are their goals if elected mayor for housing. So reminder, just to keep the questions to questions. Also note that this isn't, let's see. Oh darn, I'll just say it. No booing, no aggressive name calling, no shouting, no screaming. We're all civil, right? We all want to come here to learn and to be informed. So let's just be mindful. Let's see. I also want to tell you about the format, not only to let our candidates know how we're going to do this, but also let you guys know, again, this is an engaging type of event, so we want you to be involved. So we're calling this a town hall style. We want to give the candidates to interact and be engaged with you guys. Y'all will share a microphone over here. We'll get started in just a bit with that. I also want to let you know that we'll start with I'll introduce the candidates and give you just a very basic bio of each candidate that's coming up. We'll start with three questions that I've prepared. You guys have about 2 minutes to answer them. I'll keep track on here. We'll try to keep as much as on time as we can. After that, we've also asked, and I don't know if you guys noticed, we've also asked for your questions during social media as we were getting this event going. And we've had a couple of them emailed to us, so I've jotted them down. I'll call your names out if you are here today. Stand up and I'll bring you the question that we got prior to this event. And that'll kick off the segment where we talk and get questions from the audience. And then after that, each of the candidates will have an opportunity to do a closing statement for about 2 minutes. And you guys tell us your wrap-ups and your thoughts. Does that sound good, y'all? Sounds good. Right now? Oh, yes, I will, sorry, the question was, do you have any indication how far we are into our time? I will give you guys nods. I will direct you. Yes, yes, yes. All right, so we're here because this is a special election. on June 5th. The special election was necessary after former Mayor Ed Lee unexpectedly died in December, and this really did speed up our campaign season. His term was not set to end until 2020, so the winner of the special election will fill out the rest of that term. There are 8 candidates that have filed to run. Right now, we have 4 candidates with us. I will introduce each one. We'll start in alphabetical order with Angela Alioto. She's a civil rights attorney, served on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors for 8 years, from 1989 to 1997. You were also the board president during a portion of that time. She was born in San Francisco and attended college in the Bay Area. Angela, thank you for being here. We also have Jane Kim. Jane Kim is currently a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. She represents District 6. She was first elected to the board in 2010. Her current term ends in 2019. Prior to her election, Kim was an organizer at Chinatown Community Development Center and a civil rights attorney. She was born in New York City and attended college in the Bay Area. Thank you, Jane, for coming. Next, we have Mark Leno. Mark Leno is a local business owner. He served on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors from 1998 to 2002. He was then elected to the State Assembly in 2002. Then, he was elected to the State Senate in 2008. Until 2016, he was representing the 11th District, which included San Francisco. He was born in Milwaukee, attended college in Colorado. Thank you, Mark. We also have Amy Farrow-Weiss. She's the director of the St. Francis Homeless Challenge that tries to find places for homeless people to live. Prior to that, Weiss has held numerous jobs in the community organizing and training consultant areas. She was born in Berkeley and attended college in the Bay Area. Thank you, Amy. All right, so we'll get started soon. I just want to make sure y'all can hear me, right? Yes, yes. Okay, thanks for responding and being engaging, y'all. This is fun. All right, so we're going to start with a couple of questions. And we'll start in the first order, for the most part, with alphabetical. So, Angela, we'll start with you, and then we'll pass on down. You're like, oh, this is... That's how it's been happening. Since elementary school, I'm sure. Well, being an Aguilar and the last name, I totally get that feeling. I'm always having to go first, which meant you overstudied. It makes you a leader. All right, so we're going to talk about housing right now, obviously, but housing buckets. It's what I like to call buckets. According to last year's housing inventory report that was produced by the city's planning department, just 16% of the units built in 2016 were considered affordable. And when we talk about affordable, in this sense, I'm talking about housing that's cheap enough for the extremely low-income family, all the way up to the middle-income family, the middle-class family, families that make $138,000 a year. That's a wide range, right? So most of that new housing that's come online in recent years, if you look at some of the data, has been at market rate prices. So I wanted to ask the candidates, if elected mayor, how would you help the city build more affordable housing that's balanced for the very poor in our families, all the way up to the middle class, so that people can afford a home that fits their income level and live in San Francisco? Feel free to work the room if you'd like.
Oh? Now that might be a little too loud. So I'll hold it lower down. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you today. It's been a great day being in the parade and being with the Irish community of San Francisco, which is a very large community. Affordability of housing. You know, I just heard that affordability of housing, $130,000. Housing in San Francisco is simply not affordable for the average person. It hasn't been affordable for years. I just want to give a little background. In 2004 to 2012, I did a homeless plan that housed over 11,000 people. In that homeless plan that was extremely successful, to the degree where our budget analyst is saying go back and redo that plan because it worked, we had housing in the pipeline. And then in 2012, the housing that was in the pipeline for the formerly homeless that we were literally taking off the streets and giving them a unit was moved over to what is now called, what was then called affordable. So when you find out what affordable is, you realize that somebody making $80,000 a year cannot live here. You find out someone making $100,000 that can't live here, $130,000 with a family cannot live here, which is why there are so few families in San Francisco now. So as mayor, I would always promise, and though I have to tell you, this is one topic, the availability of housing and affordable housing is a topic you need to call the experts on, because it isn't easy to just get up and say, I'm going to propose, 30,000 new affordable housing units. There's so much more to it. I believe, well, first of all, I have pledged to have the 5,000 units that Mayor Lee has proposed, and that's fine. But every single builder in this city that wants to build housing needs to sit down with the city and agree upon an amount that is below what they're calling affordable. I realize right now it's like 18%. Some have suggested 25%. There's a new building on Mission Street that's 50% affordable. But still, affordable isn't what San Francisco needs right now. It's below affordable. That's what we need in order to keep the teachers, the paramedics, the firefighters, the police, keep people in town and have them be able to have families too. So I am all for building much more housing, but I'm also all for a severe analysis and audit of the planning department to find out exactly what we have and what we don't have and what is in the pipeline for affordable housing and below affordable housing.
Thank you so much.
I couldn't tell if you were telling me.
No, it's good. No worries. Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Jane Kim. Do you want the question yet again? Yeah, that's balanced for extremely low-income families and the middle class.
Hi, Norman Fong. I only gave him a shout out because he hired me as a community organizer 18 years ago, which is how I got my start in San Francisco local politics, so it's good to see you here. Affordable housing has been a big part of my legislative work over the last 7 years on the Board of Supervisors, and I am proud of the fact that I have negotiated and won more affordable and middle-income housing than any legislator on this board over the last 7 years. Now, the district I represent is currently absorbing close to 80% of all of San Francisco's residential and commercial growth, and we could have just let that growth happen without any type of intention or planning around what gets built. Now, 60% of San Franciscans qualify for affordable housing under federal HUD guidelines. So that is a big percentage of San Franciscans that we are not building for today. To build more affordable housing takes funds. And by the way, traditionally in this country, government used to be in the business of building housing. In fact, between 1940 and 1980, the federal government built close to 6,000 units of subsidized low-income and middle-income housing through HUD. And then after 1980, President Reagan, under the guise of small government, decided that the market should take care of housing the poor and the middle class, and we see where that has left us 40 years later. And the federal government has since only built 1,000 units of affordable housing. And HUD's budget used to be larger than the Department of Defense. So we need to reverse that trend at the federal and state level. But what can we do here locally? One, developers who are responsible now for building housing for the wide spectrum of incomes throughout San Francisco, we have to ask them to build more affordable housing. And we can do that. And I've been able to demonstrate that in projects throughout my district where we've been able to achieve as high as 40% low-income and middle-income housing, up to 150% of average median income. Now, we often do that by raising density and height on these projects, conferring value to land. If you add an additional story or 10 stories to someone's parcel, you're actually giving that land, that property owner money, right? Because you're adding value to their land. So as we add value to land, we have to ask those developers to share that value back with the community by building more affordable and middle-income housing, parks, open space, transit improvements. Second, the city needs to give in more to affordable housing. We have the Housing Trust Fund, where we're capturing tax increment, loss through redevelopment. We also have the $310 million affordable housing bond, which was incredibly important. The last time we passed a bond was in 1996 at $100 million. So we need to make sure the affordable housing bond is a regular part of our capital cycle. It comes out every couple of years. I'd like to see us pass a $1 billion general obligation bond, similar to what Santa Clara County did.
Thank you so much. Mr. Leno,
Good afternoon, everyone.
go ahead.
Thank you all for participating in this exercise in democracy, and want to thank all of the sponsors for bringing us here together. The issue of affordable housing has been something that has been one of my top priorities going back to my years on the Board of Supervisors in the late 1990s. At that time, I began to author our inclusionary zoning ordinance, which was the first time San Francisco ever mandated that a percentage of all new market rate housing be below market rate. And we passed that after years of working on it to get just the sweet spot. We had for-profit developers, not-for-profit developers, and it passed unanimously at the board. Since then, we have built upwards of 5,000 units of below market rate housing for San Francisco. So that is a very important component. And as Erika wanted us to recognize, that originally was for 55% below area median income. Now we're all the way up to about 120% of area median income because the need continues to grow. But we're going to have to be very creative at looking in other ways and working not only with the state, unfortunately the federal government's not there for us anymore, but also with our regional partners. This is not a local issue unique to San Francisco. The entire Bay Area is in need of affordable housing, and we should work with our regional partners for a large general obligation bond for affordable housing. I also, as chair of the Senate Budget Committee, was able to bring back to San Francisco $500 million, more than both of our affordable housing bonds combined, to expedite the construction of 3,300 affordable housing units at Mission Bay, Trans Bay, and Hunters Point Shipyard. So working with the state, working with our regional partners, making sure we get as much out of our inclusionary zoning ordinance, all of those and more ideas that we need to scour from the best and the brightest will get us there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. We'll hear from Amy Weiss.
Stable, affordable rent is an essential need for so many of our workers and our families and our residents. And so I'm going to just start us off by passing around the Costa-Hawkins repeal petition. And my campaign has already collected 60 signatures, so I hope that everyone will join me in collecting signatures during this campaign cycle.
Amy, I'm going to ask that that actually be placed outside.
Oh, drat. All right. Well, other forums I've been able to pass it around. Why not? Got a captive audience, right?
That doesn't mean
Sure.
you can't participate.
So here's what we need in San Francisco. We need a third financing mechanism right now. We do have the inclusionary and we do have federal tax credits that can pay up to 60% AMI in one development. But we need this middle zone. And we also need to demand as a city that any upzoning that we do is 50% affordable. And the only way we can do that is with this new financing mechanism so that we're getting, I like what the small sites program does right now for San Francisco, where they'll give 0 to low interest loans to be able to support the financing to purchase small buildings. And so instead of giving tax credits, I like the idea of doing this 0 to low interest financing where we support the developers in building that 50% affordable. And I think it should be stratified between 15% AMI, which currently I am 15% AMI, by the way, I am a low income resident, all the way up to 120% AMI, which is 2 teachers living together, which we need to do as well. By the way, the ADU program, additional dwelling unit program, is something I've been promoting since I ran for mayor in 2015. Unfortunately, it didn't get picked up, and we can do it now, whoever becomes mayor. It's $200,000 a pop to do an additional dwelling unit in one of the 37,000 parcels that's been identified already. So that could be 5,000 units we build with $1 billion, and it can be supporting local labor, and it can be geared towards our workforce. I think the affordability should be 30% net income,
We can probably
not
talk
gross.
about that in a bit. But
Sure.
Thank you so much. All right. Let's go on to our second question. So our second question is, we hear of San Franciscans all the time talking about how they're moving away from San Francisco because it's just so hard to live here. Perhaps they've been out, just out pushed out because of how expensive it is. Maybe their rent is too high. Maybe it's just not enough to make a living, which then creates these long traffic lines, commutes, because perhaps they're living further out in the Bay Area or in the peninsula, or sometimes they relocate to Sacramento, or even out of state even, right? So I want to know, if you're elected mayor, what policies or initiatives do you think can help renters and owners right now? This is beyond sort of the concept of building more housing to prevent displacement. What do you think policies and initiatives that can be done right now that can help renters and owners stay in their homes and prevent the loss of existing rental housing? Let's go backwards this time. So Amy, we'll start with you.
Well, I grew up in the Bay Area, and I've lived in a variety of different places, including Portland, and it's always felt to me and my friends that San Francisco, you gotta hustle a little bit harder to stay here, right? It's a little bit harder than other places, and I felt personally, since I've been here in 2007, I've been displaced twice, and it's really devastating, and I felt like the city was trying to spit me out, but I decided that I grew roots here. I went to SF State for organizational development. I grew roots here for the first time in a long time, and so I have held on with everything I have, and a lot of people in this room have as well. But what we can do, number one, Costa-Hawkins repeal. Let's make sure that we can extend rent control to everyone so you don't have a landlord that can increase the rent just because they want to the next month. So everybody in this room, please do petition gathering for Costa-Hawkins because that's so important. There's another thing on the ballot as well, which is the right to counsel. And it's so important that we pass that. So people here, some of you gathered signatures for that. Everybody, if they are under threat of eviction, needs that support. And we also need the level before that where it's mediation. And so I've been talking to some small property owners, and I was a small property owner with the Community Land Trust when I worked there as operations manager, and I had to actually negotiate some move-out agreements with people because people were threatening other people that they lived with, and it wasn't the right situation for them. But we always cared where they landed, and that's really important too. And so with that in mind, if we can get to this place where anybody who is being evicted, there's a first level of mediation support for some of the, between the property owner and the tenant, and then if it turns out that the person who's the tenant needs that additional support, then we should definitely do that. But I've talked to a lot of property owners that have said that they don't actually rent out all their units. And so we have to do something around vacancy taxes because supply and demand does not work when you can withhold supply. Are you with me on that? Thanks.
Yes. The question is, what initiatives and policies could you implement now to keep renters and owners in their place and protect existing rental housing?
Okay. So whereas only about 10% of San Franciscans can afford to purchase market rate housing, only about 15% of us can afford to rent market rate housing. So the need for affordable housing stock for renters is crucial. And our most valuable affordable housing stock for renters is our rent-controlled units. And that's why I have focused so much on the Ellis Act in recent years. My first year in Sacramento, working with many of you in the room, I was able to amend the Ellis Act, the only time it's ever been amended, to exempt single-room occupancies, SROs. And when we did that, we protected over 12,000 of San Francisco's most vulnerably housed, those this close to eviction and becoming homeless. And when we're talking about displacement and eviction, we know that we're also talking about the possibility of homelessness. So for those who have a home, we have to do everything within our power to keep them in their homes. It's much more expensive for taxpayers to help someone get off the street than to stay in their home. And so that means, yes, legal assistance to keep folks who are challenged in their tenancy to succeed in fighting that challenge. And additionally, of course, rental assistance. Again, better spent up front rather than the back end after people have already been evicted. The city can also invest in taking buildings and units off the speculative market. Housing used to be a place where we lived, not a commodity that is being bought and sold on international speculative markets. So just a few ideas of how we can and must keep people in their homes.
Thank you, Mr. Leno. Ms. Kim.
So how do we keep tenants and families in place in their home today? One, I was proud to work with many of you in this room today to pass Eviction Protection 2.0 in 2015, where we, thank you, stemmed the tide of low-fault evictions throughout San Francisco, and we have seen a dramatic drop in these types of evictions where landlords were evicting tenants because they were repainting their bedroom walls and leaving their bicycles in common areas, or like in Chinatown, hanging their laundry out of their bedroom. And for the first time ever instituted vacancy rent control on owner move-in evictions for 5 years when landlords do OMIs to make sure that they were truly doing an owner move-in eviction where rent increases would not matter to that owner. We need to continue to protect tenants and also to stabilize our rent control buildings today. For every 2 units of affordable housing we build, we lose a rent-controlled unit to demolition, condo conversion, Ellis Act evictions, and others. And so right now, we're in many ways just running in place, and we have a lot more work to do to help preserve our existing rent control stock. Amy had mentioned our small site acquisition fund. I've been a huge proponent of it. Our district has allocated more than $10 million to add to this fund through developer fees in Rincon Hill, and we purchased at least 4 buildings here in District 6, 1 on Turk, 2 on Natoma, 1 on Folsom Street, where we were able to protect those residents and keep them in place so that they weren't evicted into the speculative market. We also need to pass a speculators tax again. Proposition G, which many of us here in the room supported, we need to bring that back to make sure that we are taking the incentive out of the greed incentivized sales that we're seeing throughout the city. The vast majority of evictions, by the way, target the most vulnerable of residents. They target the elderly, people who speak English as a second language, and individuals with disabilities. And we know, oh.
Sorry.
Okay. Do we have a timekeeper?
Well, so we've got one right here, and I'll wrap you up.
Got it.
But yes, we can talk more to that. Obviously, it sounds like we are engaged audience. We know what we're talking about. We've got our good definitions about housing. So one reminder before we get to Ms. Elliott over here. We're also following the discussion on social media. We're using the hashtag SF Housing Town Hall. Please add to the discussion online. And also, as you're listening to our candidates talk about these things, if you've got a question about them, pass them up to the ends, especially if there's something there that they're talking about and you want to know more about. Angela.
When I was president of the Board of Supervisors and the 2 years before rent control had first come up, and then I co-sponsored several amendments to it. It's an area that is really very difficult to understand in the sense that can you have a tax on future vacancies? I think that's a great idea. You have to balance, of course, the property interest is a constitutional benefit detriment balance, but on the other hand, the city is not livable. There's so many other reasons why people are leaving. I have fought the Ellis Act evictions for years as a discrimination trial lawyer. Believe me, I have fought them for years, and by the way, I win those. And any kind of help or exemption that can be done with the Ellis Act, I am all for it and always will be for it. And everything that that Senator Leno did was with the SROs was absolutely incredible, because that also was a place where we would be putting the formerly homeless. But having said that, you know, it isn't just all these rules and regulations that are having people leave San Francisco. There are many reasons people are leaving San Francisco, not the least of which the city is filthy. And that's because DPW doesn't do its job. The city is dangerous for kids. And that's because DPW, again, doesn't do its job. The city has so many poor homeless people living in the streets that it's absolutely unconscionable in a $1 billion city. A $1 billion city. Our city government is $10 billion. That is, $1 billion is $1,000 million, and it's pretty astronomical. We have $10 billion. We have to do all we can to keep people that make $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in our city, and at the same time, we need to house our formerly homeless people and get them off the streets of our beautiful city and then clean our streets. So I am for anything, especially commercial vacancy control taxes. I mean, why would they be allowed to keep their commercial sites vacant for 6, 7, 8 months when they could easily be rezoned and turned into housing?
Thank
so
you, Ms.
I'm for any
Iliotto.
progressive program that would give more housing in the city and county of San Francisco.
Thank you so much. So I want to remind you guys that so we're collecting these questions. So we're going to stop collecting these questions after we move out of this 3 questions. I'm getting to my 3rd question here. So if you've got anything that you want to be read up here or you want to present a question, please try to get them in as soon as possible. So our 3rd question is about homelessness, because I feel like we cannot talk about housing without talking about homelessness. So last year's homeless point-in-time count found that there were 7,500 homeless people in San Francisco, and that's about a 2% increase over the last 4 years. And the majority of those counted last year were unsheltered, and that means that people were living in tents in the streets, perhaps even in their car. These are unsheltered people living on the streets. So I wanted to know from the candidates, what is your most creative but practical solution for finding homes for the homeless and making sure that they stay housed, which is a very tough thing sometimes? I'm going to start with Mark Leno. Random. Go ahead.
So when you realize that about 70% of those who are living on our street without shelter, without a home, were living under a roof in San Francisco before they became homeless, we recognize that we've got to do everything we can to keep folks in their homes. And that's why I would take speculators to court, because they're illegally and inappropriately using the Ellis Act. It was written for landlords, not for speculators, to go out of the business of being a landlord. So I would take them to court to stop those evictions. Step 1, keep those in a home, in their home. Just yesterday, I unveiled a program which I entitle End Street Homelessness by 2020. That's the 3,500 people living on our streets today who should never have been there to begin with. We've got to make that a top priority. We've been talking a good game, we've been investing money, we've made some progress, we kept a lid on it getting much worse, but it is not acceptable. And we cannot continue to do things the way we're doing them. So step 1 for ending street homelessness by 2020 would be to make use of an estimate of upwards of 1,500 empty SROs in San Francisco today. So we need to be working with the building owners to find out what their resistances are and then make arrangements with them. And there'll be a lot of savings at the Department of Public Works, at the police department, the fire department, the Department of Public Health, our county jails, if we find the will to take people off the streets. And then we have a waiting list of 1,000 people every night who just want to get into shelters. So we've got to expand our shelter beds, if only temporarily, while we continue to find a way to build permanent supportive housing for those folks as well.
Thank you so much. I'm going to call on Angela next. Let's hear from Angela Iliotto.
2004, we sat together with 60 people that hated each other. It was the Hotel Council, it was Jennifer at the Coalition on Homelessness. Everybody in that room really disliked each other. 6 months, it was fascinating. We even had the Archdiocese, and so that was extra colorful. So we came up with a plan that works. I do not understand why the city and county of San Francisco couldn't stick with a plan that worked. It housed people, the lack of recidivism in our units where we house people to today, those same people are still there. It's 94% lack of recidivism, and it's very simple. Shelters are a terrible place, ladies and gentlemen. You wouldn't want anyone to go to a shelter. Shelters and other programs that are temporary are not the answer to homelessness. Permanent supportive housing is the answer. Within 48, it's the answer. It works. Let's do it again. We have the buildings in San Francisco. You heard Senator Leno say we have over 1,000 SROs. That's incredible. Those are all for formerly homeless people that can deal with it, that are not triple diagnosed, that do not have other situations where they couldn't deal with living in a unit. In other words, when you pick the person up off the street, within 48 hours you decide where they go. It's a type of triage. They either go to medical, which several go to, or they go to a rehab, they go to alcohol rehab, drug rehab, whatever the particular place they're supposed to go, they go to that. After that, this city should never let any program we pay millions of dollars to a year, millions of dollars, put that person that has been rehabbed back into the street. Never. Every single one of those programs needs to be stopped because it's millions. It was over $600 million in 2004. It's millions of dollars. They need to understand you take a person and you rehab them. I'm going to pretend you're not there.
I'm going to stop you, though.
Rehab them. You put them into housing. They're human beings. Most of them can get a job again. Some of them can go to another type of rehab. You never put them back into the streets. Thank you for your...
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
So easy.
Yes, ma'am.
We have to expand our rent subsidy program. It is a great program that we have here in San Francisco, and I've been a leader of making sure that we expand rent subsidies for our families and individuals every single year on the Board of Supervisors in our budget fights to keep more people in their homes so they don't get evicted or unable to pay rent and end up on our streets. We need more step-up housing, and I want to thank Central City SRO Collaborative and Community Housing Partnership for fighting for step-up housing so that we can free existing room in our single-room occupancy hotels with supportive housing for residents that feel ready to move on to what we call step-up housing so we can free up these units for people who live on our streets today. We need more shelter beds. We just simply need more shelters to get people off the streets. They're incredibly expensive, but it's not okay to let people sleep on the streets in sleeping bags or in tents, and we need more medical respite shelters. I actually took the challenge by the Coalition on Homeless and went through the reservation system and spent a night in one of our shelters next door down the street because I wanted to understand what that experience was like. And when I stayed at the shelter, I understood that our shelters were not built for the demographic that is coming to stay in the shelter today. The shelters are built for someone like me, young, able-bodied, down on my luck, and all I need is a bed and shelter for a couple weeks, a couple of months. What I learned at shelter that night is that people are far older and far sicker than I had realized. And after that stay, I fought for full-time nurses at all of our single adult shelters, which we now have, and I fought to expand a medical respite shelter in the South of Market on mission that's staffed by nurses, clinicians, and psychologists, and not just the minimum wage staff members that we put in shelters that get no training to address the population that's coming in and are also frustrated because they can't serve the people that they are there to serve. Finally, creative idea, I want to explore eminent domain for vacant SRO hotels. There is no reason why these units should be vacant and offline. And yes, there are instances in which we can negotiate with the owners, like with Minna Lee, where we're going to bring 50 units online that have been vacant, but we should be exploring this for all the other vacant units.
Thank you.
I have a background working in direct service and mental health and transitional housing and intentional healing communities, as well as program evaluation and development. And so after the 2015 election, I decided to be inspired by Francis of Assisi, who said, do what's necessary, do what's possible, and soon you will be doing the impossible, and actually take on the encampment crisis and shelter shortage crisis as a manageable crisis. And I want to let everyone in here know that it is a manageable crisis right now. We have an estimated 3,100 to 3,500 people living right now in tents or in sleeping bags or in RVs or vans on the street. Currently, and I started the St. Francis Homelessness Challenge a week or two after the election and have been going strong with that ever since. I've been assessing what the city's doing, offering analysis and developing and piloting programs. So the city is currently spending $30 million a year on DPW and SFPD just for encampments. Just for encampments, $30 million. And we see the result. The outcome is what we see on our streets right now. If we have the ability to invest $30 million, I actually have a strategy where we can stabilize everyone who's currently living in crisis on our streets. We can do that. There's actually a plan. I would stop campaigning if I felt that, let's get the tech community to pony up 15 million and let's redirect some of those resources right now. And I would joyfully lead this process for a very, give me $35,000 a year and let me lead this. And that would be a dream opportunity for me to actually help stabilize what's going on the streets. We have something called Safe Organized Spaces and an Encampment Livability Index. So there is a plan that I have starting ASAP to June to whenever it is. We can start right now. And you know what the city's doing right now? They're not working with encampment residents and the neighbors to address this crisis. So those two tools, the Encampment Livability Index as well as the Safe Organized Spaces framework, for $30 million, redirect those resources and actually work with encampment residents. So it's not just move along, it's you belong with reasonable agreements in safe, organized spaces on your pathway to housing.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the second part of our program, which is, I told you earlier while we were we were promoting the event and getting people to come, getting our candidates to engage in our voters, we asked for your questions to send them along. And we had a couple of them, so I decided to see if I can call on a few people. Hopefully, they might have come. Is Daphne in the room? Daphne, hi, stand up. Y'all, this is Daphne. Come this way. Come this way. Can I have you come up over on this side? All right. So Daphne, you sent us a question. You are a social worker, am I right? Okay. And you also live in what part of this city? And let me have you move this way so that you might. Oh, come over here. Come this way. I know, right? We'll just dance together. All right. So move this way, just so the crowd can see you a little bit, and also we can wave to the camera and say hi. So Daphne, tell me, where do you live?
I'm in the Mission Dolores area.
And tell me how long have you lived there?
I've lived in San Francisco for 27 years, and I've been in the Mission for 25.
You told me that in your question you've been there at the same apartment for almost half of the time that you've lived here.
Yeah, I've been there for 12 years.
And you've seen some changes.
A lot of changes in the neighborhood, but also in my direct neighborhood and in my building, which is 6 units. We have been through 3 different property managers in the past 2 years, and now they bought half the building out. They are now renovating all 3 units, and we've been living with construction work for the past 2 years, and now they have told us they are digging 3 units under my building, so it's another year plus of construction.
So you also had a question for our candidates. Tell me your question for our candidates.
My question was specifically how the candidates would address people in the under $50,000 a year bracket and how you would go to protect people in housing so they can continue to work. Because if I lose my housing, I have to leave San Francisco after building a life here for 27 years.
Thank you for sharing your question with us. So candidates, let's try to answer Daphne's question. How can we build housing for folks who are making $50,000 a year or below, and make sure that maybe Daphne still has a place to live? Angela, you're holding the mic.
Next?
Yeah, you might as well. Come on, you're holding the mic.
I can't do this alphabetical thing to figure out where I am in it. That's exactly the population that I'm referring to, trying to stay in San Francisco and keep you in San Francisco, because quite frankly, you are San Francisco. And we have brought all of these the tech industry to this city where it's become a $1 billion city, but there was no planning. There was no municipal planning. Nobody sat down with everybody and said, okay, if you're going to bring 3,000 people to this building, where are they going to live? Where are they going to park their cars? Are they going to drive? The Lyft Uber thing, in my opinion, is one of the biggest scams ever, because they come, they come, I admit I don't take them, But having said that, they come and they do business in the city and county of San Francisco. I own my little civil rights law firm. I pay business tax. I do business in the city. They come here, they do business, and they pay no city taxes at all. They're ruining our streets. They park in the middle of the street. They're arrogant. They're arrogant. They cause not just traffic, but dangerous situations, and they don't pay a penny to be able to work in our city. Now, I'm not saying the poor driver, who, as I understand it, even makes less than minimum wage, which is disgraceful, but we should demand that that Uber, Lyft, and Chariot sit down at the table with the city and county of San Francisco and agree on how they're going to do business here and take part in the infrastructure. Because having said that, that money can go to housing to people that do make $50,000, $60,000 a year. But also, there need to be coalitions. There's no such thing as coalitions in the present government, where you sit down with the government, the IT, and the communities, and you have a coalition of people who are aimed at keeping the people that make $50,000 a year a year. Each development project needs to have an agreement that there's going to be availability for that that salary range.
Thank you, Angela.
I always feel like you're telling me it's
No, I'm the
Thank you.
I'm haunting y'all. Who wants to tackle that question next? Yeah, you can go ahead.
We have to protect tenants in place today with strong tenant protection ordinances, like Eviction Protection 2.0, and also like the right to counsel, which will be on the ballot for June 5th. We know that close to 90% of tenants don't have any type of representation in eviction proceedings, but when they do, they win the vast majority of the time. So they did it in New York City. Please vote for it on June 5th. I want to thank Tenants Together and Tenants Union for putting on the ballot, because we absolutely need to provide the right to counsel in these types of cases. We need to both protect rent control buildings and strengthen tenant protections and rent control and repeal Costa-Hawkins, and we need to build more affordable housing. That is a two-pronged approach to how we keep our working and middle class housed here in San Francisco. We can build and continue to build on tenant protections as we continue to. I believe we should expand rent control. That requires a change in state law. I think we should have a rolling rent control year. So as each year moves up, another year of constructed units goes on the rent control market, because those are our working class and middle class units here in San Francisco. And we have to build more affordable and middle income housing. Building housing alone will not make San Francisco more affordable. Building as much affordable and middle income housing as possible is going to make San Francisco more affordable. And we need to increase both developer obligation in creating that type of housing, and also put in more public subsidies and funding to make sure that we're both creating affordable housing and preserving rent control buildings.
So I just want to dive in a little bit to this idea of the additional dwelling unit program that I'd like to see happen in San Francisco. So once again, there are 37,000 parcels that have been identified to have one or more additional units added within the existing building envelope. So what the city could do with a pool of money is say, we go to the property owners, and let's start with, small property owners and marginalized communities first, and we say, we've identified your building to be able to have an additional dwelling unit. If you sign here, we will take care of the financing. We won't add property tax increase. We'll do the design and construction, all of that for you, if you agree to rent to one of our workforce or residents or families in SFUSD for a maximum of 30% net of their income. Doesn't that sound amazing? I mean, think about that for a second. What we would do is be saying, we're going to take care of the financing for this, so as you are paying off that loan with the rent that's coming in, we have an expanded pool of our workforce and families and residents who are currently rent burdened, who would join in. This could be done through MoCD, the Mayor's Office of Housing, new online platform, Dahlia. Let's say you're a worker and you're paying more than 30% net of your income, or you can't live in the city, you can't afford to live in the city. You could be part of this. The other part I really like about this idea is that we could focus it on 100% local hire. And so that means that people would be we'd be building the building trades with our underemployed and unemployed residents to be able to build San Francisco together. So chew on that. I know there's a lot that I just shared with you.
Thank you. Thank you guys for being mindful of the time. I want to try to get to some of the questions there, so thank you so much.
So Tabitha, I wasn't quite sure from your situation if your landlord was making these improvements with the intent to so disrupt your life and your fellow neighbors' lives that you would leave. If that's the case, you're not quite sure, but if that is the case, or when that happens, and we do know that that happens, there should be a direct hotline to the mayor's office so that we can keep an eye on that and make sure that tenants who are being harassed are addressed. Getting back to that Ellis Act, which is abused by speculators who aren't landlords and don't intend or pretend to be landlords, as I mentioned, they should be challenged in court and stopped from using a law that was not written for them and keep folks in their housing. We also, when I was in Sacramento, authored a bill that clarified in state law that teachers should be able to benefit from affordable housing that is on land deemed to be surplus by school districts throughout California. And that way we can address a middle income range of folks who are in need, specifically in the school district, teachers as well as other staff. And so using a variety of opportunities, both with low-income tax credits. This beautiful place, this building, built in, I think, 1910, houses 172 formerly homeless people. There was some general fund money, but a lot of low-income tax credits from the federal government, as well as, because it's a historic building, historic tax credits. So again, piecing together as many ways as possible, keeping folks in their homes, like Tabitha, and those who are on the street into homes in permanent supportive housing.
Thank you. So I'm going to call on, well, before we get started again, we've got about 25 minutes left in this building. I want to try to get through more questions. Would the candidates agree if I asked you guys to limit your responses to a minute? It's tough, I know. Actually, I will say, Mark, you've done a really great job. We're gonna try real hard, okay? I like when we try. I'm gonna call on Natalie. Is Natalie in the building? Natalie asked us a question. Natalie? No? Okay. Hi, Natalie. You asked us a question about displacement in San Francisco in African Americans. Come up here. She's going to tell you your question. So, Natalie, Natalia. I'm so sorry. Is it Natalia? It's Natalia. Okay, so Natalia, tell me what part of San Francisco you live in.
I grew up in the Richmond district
How long have you lived in San Francisco?
my whole life. Yeah.
Tell me in a short way, why did you come today?
Oh, well, I'm obviously deeply concerned about displacement of low-income people, African Americans, working class people in San Francisco. Many of the people I grew up with don't live in the city anymore.
So tell me your question. What question did you write down that you had for the candidates to answer?
Well, something that seems not to be talked about a lot in this candidates race is what candidates are prepared to do to try to stem the tide of African American displacement in San Francisco. And I also wanted to know if candidates had any ideas for reparations for African American tenants who lost home equity during civic redevelopment and due to other city official housing policy in the past. And specifically, I wondered if candidates were prepared to speak on what they might do to support the tenants at the Midtown Park Apartments, which is an apartment complex in the Fillmore Western Addition, which was built as redevelopment housing for homeowners and tenants who lost their homes to civic redevelopment. The tenants now, 50 years later, are facing displacement at the hands of the city and Mercy Housing and are calling for no displacement, no demolition, rent control, or home equity. Thank you.
So this is a tough one, or tough couple there. Thank you so much for giving me your question. So that's a lot to tackle there, y'all. I'm gonna say try your best. Yeah. I'm sorry. Okay, so he's saying he's from the area that he's talking about. Uh-huh.
This city has done ethnic cleansing in the Western Addition Fillmore.
Let's add that to the question that we have here. Well, we've got to get out of here pretty soon. I'll give you 30 seconds. Here we go.
As a result, our nationality has been replaced, okay, and our population.
Come this way so you can speak into the mic so people can hear you, and then we'll add that to a question here.
My nationality has been displaced, and as a result, our numbers are nowhere near the populations of other nationalities in the city. Now, in order to correct this problem, we need an injunction relief to replace that 60 square block and footage that displaced all the black people in the Fillmore area. This Justin Herman, who displaced our neighborhood, okay, racially profiled that neighborhood in the overall city and got rid of the black skin colored population.
Tell me real quick, what's your name?
I'm Mr. Wright, okay?
And how long have you lived in San Francisco?
All my life.
Very good.
Okay? I'm old enough to be your grandfather.
Yes, you are.
Okay, now, because of this displacement, and then what makes it so bad for me is because after you displace all my nationality, I was doing construction and I helped build the Fillmore Center. You lied and said that the blacks that got displaced would be the first to move back in, but then you set the rents at a requirement higher than the income that the black people was making. So that's why we got a low amount of populations of blacks in the city now.
So let's get to your question. Well, I really want to get the candidates to answer.
In order to answer my question, you got to understand all the facts. That's why I'm letting you know.
I know, but we really got to get to the candidates' questions.
As a result of that displacement, all new housing that's being built is being set at an income requirement that's higher than the incomes of people, like Mission Rock.
So you'd like to make sure that housing is set at an income that is available for...
The incomes has got to be set for all incomes of people who live in the city. People that have disabilities, people who are on Social Security, and people who have permanent disabilities that's both mental and physical, and our veterans too. But you said
Thank you.
Let me finish.
We've also got to get everybody else's questions. It is 5:11, sir.
Look, we got plenty of time.
So why don't you sit down and let's get these questions. Will you?
Let me show you an example. Like this building.
Okay.
Let me finish.
Let's sit down. Can you please sit down? Well, but we've given you a minute, and we've also need to get through somebody else's questions. We don't actually. We don't actually, because we have to get out of this building. It's a rented piece.
That's one reason why you're not getting the problem taken care of.
Okay. Okay. So the question was, how do we stop making the displacement? I'm sorry. Okay. So the question was, how do you stop the tide of African American displacement in the city, especially in the Fillmore area, to make sure that African Americans are not leaving the city as much as they used to be because they were targeted and because we have things called redlining and racist policies back in the day when housing and redevelopment agencies were available. So, for that reason, I'm going to... Right, so you're priced out. I get it. So, right. So we're going to start with Jane Kim, who's going to answer that question, or try to.
And I have 1 minute to answer this great question. So my team is working on a blueprint for having a mayor's office of race and equity within our administration, which would specifically develop a blueprint for how we how we bring back communities that have been displaced by histories of policies that have displaced them, particularly communities of colors and the African American community out of San Francisco. It takes a lot more than housing. We have to do intentional race-based investment on small businesses in African American communities that are Black-owned, on job programs that target the African American community, and also in housing as well. We have to build significantly more affordable housing. We have to consider preferences. City of Portland actually just announced a plan where they are targeting affordable housing preference for residents that have been displaced out of the city, and that is something that we should consider here in San Francisco too. But more than anything, we have to intentionally do investment in communities that build up economic power and economic power and job workforce in the communities to keep people in place here in San Francisco.
I have spent. I'm going to try to answer your question. Hold on a second. What?
Okay.
Okay.
Let her speak, y'all.
For the last 20 years, I've been a civil rights trial lawyer and represented over 80% of my clients are African American, and I totally understand how the city and county of San Francisco has shut the African American out of our city. Shut that whole community out of our city. Let me just say the quick answer to Midtown is that was a promise. It was a written promise, and they ought to go to court right now to save their fight. Right now. Right now. The best thing you can do is to fight back and not sit down and let it happen when it's a written promise, okay? That's that. When I ran for mayor, Willie Brown was in the race, and I kept saying, Willie, that 3rd Street rail is going to run Hunters Point out of town. You guys know it. You're building all of this property up on the hills there, and this 3rd Street corridor is going to be something that absolutely runs the African Americans out of town, and it did. So all of these things were foreseeable, and all I can say is that you have to go about the business of enforcing the MBE, LBE that I sponsored and I wrote. 16% of every job in this city that is given out by this city is supposed to go to African Americans and other minorities and women, and it's only 4%. So those that are in office need to explain why they're not enforcing the MBE, LBE laws.
Thank you.
We've seen the exodus of our African American population in this city ongoing for the past 30 years or more. And that is a tragic occurrence. We should learn from our mistakes because we're seeing it happen now to our Latino community as well. We're seeing it also happen with HIV-positive gay men and of other ethnicities with HIV. The pressures are on many communities. One way that we can address this, given that price containment for housing is as challenging as it is when we are making agreements to benefit new business sectors or for market rate development, we have to extract better benefits for our communities, and they need to be enforceable benefits for our community, and that includes local hiring. So now the Central Soma Plan is going to create 46,000 new jobs. Let's make sure they're not all coming from out of town. We should hire locally, and we can do that. Don't tell me there are not under and unemployed San Franciscans. I know many of these tech positions require great expertise. They're going to do searches around the world, but half of those jobs are for sales. We can hire locally. We need to train, and we need to make sure that these companies are focused on local hiring, and that will raise wages of San Franciscans to better meet the cost of housing.
Thank you.
Economic justice and reparations for the African American community has been part of my consciousness since I did a research project back in 2008 around the neighborhood that I moved into and learned about the redlining and learned about the horrific institutionalized racism that wiped out a community. So just specifically, it'd be interesting to do a universal basic income approach that was focused on SFUSD families that were African American families that were rent burdened, or start somewhere in that way. In terms of Midtown, yes, reparations are necessary. Unfortunately, there hasn't been like a sit down at the table and have the Midtown residents be part of that process. And that's what really needs to happen, because there are 6 buildings there. And I was just talking with a group of Midtown residents the other night, and I was asking, well, how much will it cost to repair them? Are they all can they all be rehabilitated? And this cost of $10 million was put out there. And so because the city made so many missteps about this, it's important to work together with the residents to figure out what direction they want to go. And there might be the opportunity to work with the residents if it was low-income working families, African-American families that could come into those 2 new developments. There's lots of opportunities for discussion.
Thank you. Hold that for me, Maria. All right, so I want to go to the next one. Georgia. Georgia here? Georgia? You are. Hi, Georgia. Thank you for coming. Tell me a little bit about you. What's your name?
My name's Georgia, and I live in Noe Valley. I'm a homeowner. I've been here since 1979. I was a renter originally, but I was lucky enough to come at a time. I was lucky enough to come at a time when you could still buy a house.
The mic's on. I just tend to talk louder than most people. How about we shout a little?
Can I hold the thought? It'd be easier if I hold it. Yeah. Can I hold it? Oh, I can't hold it. Okay, can you hear me now? Is that better? Yeah, hi, my name's Georgia. I live in Noe Valley, District 8. I've been here since 1979. I'm a homeowner, and but I've been a homeowner for a while when you could still buy a house, and before that I was a renter.
Your question here is actually about SB 827, correct? You want to read it? Go for it.
The next mayor will be in charge of the planning department and the commission. What do you hope they accomplish, and what is your view of SB 827 and its impact on San Francisco housing?
Great question. Amy, you're holding the mic.
So currently there's already around 45,000 units that are entitled and ready to move forward with the city. So one of the things I actually learned from Christine Johnson, who's right over there, was when she was working on the planning commission, she found that there were a certain number of projects that their entitlement had expired. And so we have leverage there as a city. If we have hundreds of expired entitled projects, that's where we can also talk about eminent domain again, because we could say under threat of we either expire your entitlement, you use it, maybe there's an opportunity to say up the percentage of inclusionary and we'll help you with financing for that. So we do have some leverage in that regard. We need to streamline the process is what I keep hearing. We need to build up local workforce for construction, because we actually do have a construction shortage. And so we have so many underemployed and unemployed people in the city. Let's build, especially with what we're talking about for the Central Soma plan, we have the ability to invest in city build and Asian neighborhood design and CCSF programming so that we can actually build up that workforce to build these housing units, which is really important. And SB 827, it's wrong for the city, so I think we're all gonna agree on that. I could say more about it, but we do need to talk about how Central Soma's plan is gonna be balanced out for the city. If we have 46,000 new jobs, we need to figure out how to do zoning differently in the city.
Thank you. Mark, let's hear from you.
This is a question that gets asked at every one of our forums. It's a big issue in San Francisco right now, and it's a big debate issue across the state because it would impact all of California. Some very basic concerns about it. Number one is the risk of displacement. And because there will be greater value with the result of all of this upzoning along transit corridors, we know that there will be displacement because Los Angeles has already passed similar laws to this, and we've already seen what has happened. So groups that fight for low-income people, like Western Center on Law and Poverty, are opposed to the bill unless amended, and one of the amendments they would like is to make sure there is no demolition of any rent-controlled units along these transit corridors. Whether that amendment will be taken is unknown. Additionally, are we capturing the additional value for the public good? And so that would require some inclusionary below market rate mandate. So again, if the owner of the property, the developer, is going to get that benefit as a result of the upzoning, there must be a public benefit for it.
Thank you. Angela?
And just lastly, it's one-size-fits-all planning, which is a major problem. I don't know you can fix that with an amendment.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for this question, because it's funny, this Senate bill has evolved over this campaign. When the campaign first started, it came out, and now it's being amended. Let me just say there are 2 or 3 or 4 major problems, big problems, with what I believe this law would do. Number one, the city and county of San Francisco should never give away zoning rights or any other kind of rights to the state of California. You know, we did that. It's absurd to give away anything that we have that is powerful and helps our citizens. So that's number one. Number two, the density is fairly mind-boggling. I mean, if you take Geary Street, you literally could have 10-story buildings all the way down Geary Street and not have the infrastructure that goes with it, not have the proper transit lines that go with it, not have who we are as San Francisco. That's not who we are. We've never had high-rise corridors in this city, and we shouldn't be starting now. There are many ways to solve the availability, affordability of housing in San Francisco. So I'm against that particular bill.
Thank you.
I didn't answer the Midtown question. No displacement, no demolition, and I'm 100% committed to working with the residents so we can keep that community in place in Midtown community. Planning Department and SB 827, no one has built more housing, not just affordable housing, but even market rate housing than I have. And I've consistently done that by building in more height and more density in order to pay for affordable housing, parks, school, and transit infrastructure. My issue with SB 827 is not its intention. I believe in more density around transit corridor, but if you confer, again, more value to land, you have to ask developers to share that value back with the community by, again, building more affordable middle-income housing, more transit infrastructure, and more services that neighborhoods need in order to absorb all of that growth. Being against SB 827 does not mean that you are against building on the west side. I absolutely support density on the west side, but I want to do it with a process, locally, with a plan, hear from the community, and go through our commission process. And I have stood up to my residents. Every time I have raised heights, residents have come out to oppose that. And we work with the residents, we work with the developer to come up with a plan that works for all of us. It takes leadership. We can do that with the planning department. We can raise density, build more housing throughout San Francisco, but we don't do it, again, with a one-size-fits-all policy that, again, also disincentivizes our region from investing in public transit because they don't want to build the housing.
Thank you, Jane. Is Jackie here? Jackie Mokala? Moka, sorry. Jackie, come over here. I want you to ask your question. So tell me, Jackie, what's your name?
Jacqueline.
Jacqueline. Okay, tell me what part of San Francisco you live in.
I live in the Mission, and
tell me what is your question?
yeah. So my question is, and I have a lot of questions, so I want to see how I combine it.
Try to pick one.
Okay. Essentially, again, I grew up in the Mission, and I work in the Mission. I work at the Women's Building, and it is nowhere near what it used to be when I was there as a young girl. So my question to you is, how are you going to support the working class? And more importantly, how are you going to support acquiring land and working with the community? And essentially, how are you going to support and build 100% affordable housing? Because I have to tell you, I mean, I work at the Women's Building. I work with people who have very low income. And even then, it's really hard to get into these market rate housings. And it's, you know, I want to know how you're going to work with the people who are there and have been there for a while. And work also with community groups like Plaza 16 or people that are really working with the community to make sure that the community gets what they want.
All right. Thank you for having your question to us. Thank you.
So I've been working with the St. Francis Homelessness Challenge for the last 2.5 years with people who are living in encampments, and many of them they're disproportionately people of color, right? And so there are a lot of people that I've worked with that I've focused in the Mission and Potrero Hill and Mission Bay area, and so there are a lot of people there that need that support right now. So I'm focusing on people who don't have access to a toilet or secure sleep and shelter and trying to stabilize that. The next thing that we really need to focus on is that, you know, after the 2011 financial collapse, What ended up happening was that developers and property owners and banks ended up making out like bandits in our country and in our city. And so we need to really focus on not creating a tech boom displacement 3.0 with the Central SOMA plan that has the 46,000 jobs but doesn't have the housing. Like I've mentioned, I really want to create this financing mechanism so that we can say in any upzoning, we do 50% affordable. That's stratified from the very low income, which is me right now as well, remember, under $15,000, all the way up to 2 teachers who are, need to be able to live together, and they make about $120,000. So, but 50% stratified across that whole amount is the focus that I'm trying to do. The other thing is that if we're doing this Central SOMA plan, that means that it's gonna be about 10 years before these things really get built, and the focus should be on investing in CCSF and SF State and SFUSD so that we build those jobs to be able to build that skill set to be able to have those jobs, right?
Thank you, Amy. All right, so we've got just a few more minutes, and we want to squeeze in all our candidates here. So, Mark, take it.
An important first step if we're going to be addressing the need for 100% affordable housing, and keep in mind, that's what this building is. And we can talk to folks who do it on a regular basis. Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation is among those who do a great job in building 100% affordable. The cost of land is such a significant component of the cost of building housing. So the city must identify a revenue source so that we can acquire as much property and take the property off the speculative market so we can then be working with communities to know exactly what that community is in need of. Now, for example, the proposed project at 16th and Mission, not appropriate for that neighborhood because that is where we have seen the most evictions and displacement in recent years. 12,000 people from one neighborhood, that's what we're not learning from the mistakes of the past. So acquire the land, work with the community, and set our goals. We're not going to be able to build 100% affordable in every situation, but those are the steps we need to take to get on that path.
Thank you, Mr. Leno.
Again, this is another area. Basically, is the same answers. And I want to give an example of 16th and Mission Street. There is a building there that's actually called Monster. There's a projected building, a project that's supposed to be done there. Everywhere I go in this campaign, everybody wants affordable housing. This is in an area that's got 47% crime, 47%. I am the author of the original sanctuary law. I understand that there are more people because of the sanctuary law. I accept that responsibility. However, they are human beings and they still need housing. And I understand that we have done that beautifully since the original sanctuary law was written. But having said this 318 units on Mission Street was fought by just about everybody, and it's over 50% affordable housing, and yet it was fought. So, I mean, people have to sit down at the same table and discuss these issues and see what's best for the city. I mean, it literally is a case-by-case analysis. This is impossible to answer in a minute, okay?
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I know we're trying to get through many questions because we all have very many questions. Thank you, Jane.
In response to the community question, I negotiate land use deals almost every single week. And from major projects like the Giants parking lot all the way to 1066 Market down the street, I've always had community members in the room negotiating with me, whether it's the South of Market Community Action Network, to Central City SRO Collaborative, and Market Streets to the Massive. I've always made sure that communities are part of the deals that we negotiate because they live in our neighborhoods. How do we build more 100% affordable housing? Number one, we need a citywide IEFD, Infrastructure Enhanced Financing District. We have about 20,000 units of housing that are already entitled in Shipyard and Treasure Island today that reach to 25 to 30%
Excuse me, can you let her finish?
After with the cleanup.
Let her finish.
Not before the cleanup, after the cleanup. That is not true. Okay.
You lied.
I would like we're happy to talk with you about your displacement on Treasure Island.
The first person who didn't return phone calls to the Jewish family service that took care of me and my eviction.
Okay. If we did not If we do not contact you back, I apologize. That absolutely is not acceptable for us not to call you back. There is a wide range of affordability, Mr. Wright, from 0 to 100% of average median income. Some housing is going to be available to those that have 0% AMI, all the way to middle-class families that build up to 150% of average median income. Okay. I love my job. I really do. I love my job. And I love serving our city and county. And I fight for you every single day. And I am sorry if I did not respond to you. Now
I think we're done.
we need to build infrastructure if we're gonna build more housing. That is my answer to the question as best as I could. We need to.
I think this is like the end of our town hall, to be honest. It was a great culmination.
Mr. Wright was at my office hours last week. I will have office hours every first Friday of the month. You're welcome to come to me and talk to me personally every first Friday at 1:30 at City Hall.
Thank you. We've had such an engaging conversation today with lots of people who want questions, who have issues, who have things. It's 5:30, so I've got to wrap up here. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for coming. I want to remind you that the last day to register to vote is May 21st. So please go and register to vote. Our candidates will be available after if you've got questions. I will be available after to have questions and have conversation with you. Thank you so much. If you're interested in more events, there's a sign-up sheet. And recycle, please, and send your trash to the trash. Thank you so much.